Entonces, eso es una cosa difícil de preguntar. Hay algo que quisiera decir que no he preguntado, porque ya les he dado mis preguntas, pero no sé si tal vez usted tiene algo más que quiere levantar. Decimos en inglés, get off our chest, levantar de la...
Que le salga del corazón.
Que le salga del corazón.
Ahora sería el momento, porque ya he preguntado lo mío.
Es difícil sacarlos adelante. Soltera, son 2 hijos de prepa. Yo no quiero que ellos trabajen igual que yo. Quiero que tengan un mejor porvenir. No para que me ayuden, para que tengan una mejor calidad de vida ellos y no estén como yo.
Yo soy de enfermería. Que sí, que no, de enfermería.
This was not supposed to be this kind of story.
Aquí hacemos una pausa simbólica en la Embajada de los Estados Unidos porque a México le va a ir muy mal ahora con el nuevo gobierno de Donald Trump. Y esos vendepatrias hay que mandarlos a chingar a su madre.
The wealth of our middle class has been ripped from their homes and then redistributed all across the world. But that is the past. From this day forward, a new vision will govern our land. From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
In 2016, the United States and Mexico traded over $500 billion in goods. The U.S. is by far Mexico's top trading partner, and Mexico is in the United States' top 3, behind China and closely behind Canada. It's a relationship that has deeply influenced the economies of both partners and has emerged as a line of scrimmage in the international debate on globalization.
Sort of painful to look at.
What does it make you think?
Makes me think that I'm a dinosaur, and so is my factory.
From Juarez to the White House, this is U.S.-Mexico trade at the Crossroads. Let's go inside. To understand the frustration with NAFTA, I began with the folks that have lost out because of trade.
Mi nombre es René Daniel Cruz Velasco y soy nativo de Santo Tomás, Mazaltepec. Yo soy del 54 de octubre, del mes de octubre. Trabajo el puro campo, campesino, sí. Me dedico a sembrar haba, chícharo, frijol, maíz. Y yo siempre trabajo todo natural, nada de fertilizante, nada de químico. Yo cuido mi salud y cuido mi suelo y cuido mi familia, es todo.
NAFTA, the integration of Mexican and American value chains created significant numbers of very good and very well-paid jobs, particularly for professionals, the engineers, the economists, the accountants, for all these American firms coming to do manufacturing in Mexico. But it also displaced a lot of people at the bottom of the socioeconomic pyramid, particularly small subsistence farmers, others people without formal skills, being crowded out of their main activity, subsistence agriculture.
Before NAFTA and the WTO, a lot of countries only imported food if they needed it. They had a bad harvest, there were things they couldn't actually produce, there was a weather phenomenon, and Mexico was self-sustaining in corn for millennia. Under NAFTA, Mexico is required to start importing U.S. subsidized corn. And almost immediately, a flood of corn from the U.S. to Mexico started to displace local farmers. And basically, the rural agricultural base of Mexico was largely decimated.
Nos perjudica en el plan del precio porque los maíces que me entran son más baratos y nuestro maíz está a un precio más alto. El de fuera estuvo hasta 22 pesos, muy barato, y hasta 20, 22 pesos. El de nosotros estaba en 26, 27 pesos. Es una diferencia como de 5 pesos o 6 pesos. Entonces la gente por la economía, pues sí, se iba más sobre los otros maíces.
With subsistence farming on the decline in southern Mexico, many have migrated north in search of work.
A estas alturas de la situación global en la que estamos viviendo, es más rentable, insisto, eso llama dos filos, comprar un maíz más bueno, más bonito y más barato que producirlo. Date cuenta cuántos terrenos están tirados. Pues aquí nada más en lo que es el Valle Teco, de todas las poblaciones, el 60-70% de los dueños de las tierras las tienen tiradas. Ya no es rentable. Entonces es más fácil comprar maíz que sembrar.
Hay gente que está obligada a emigrar porque llega el temporal, siembran, no cosechan nada. ¿De qué van a sobrevivir?
Como fantasiosa de mucha gente que está allá. Antes casi se decía que iban a barrer el dinero, ¿no? Con una escoba iban a barrer, cosa que jamás sucede.
With a trade policy that appears to give preference to urban manufacturing centers, some Mexican farmers feel their government has forgotten them.
Mira, creo que la oportunidad está. Definitivamente ha variado mucho. O sea, el gobierno cada vez tiene menos interés por el campo, o tal vez sea la estrategia, abandonar el campo para que pueda obedecer más a sus intereses.
Estoy casi seguro que ningún político ahorita le interesa rescatar al campo porque no vemos ninguna acción en ese camino, ¿no? Por el contrario, parecieran que los están como tratando de exterminar, ¿no?
I raised these concerns with Juan Carlos Baker, Mexico's Undersecretary of Economy.
I fully agree with you that there are areas in our countries that can do more, or that we can do more for those areas. For example, if Chiapas or Oaxaca or Guerrero have a vocation of agribusiness and they're highly competitive in that end, we're going to look for companies in that area to go and set shop in those areas, provide them with the facilities that they need, provide them with the business environment that they need, so that they start making those connections with the local communities.
The Budd Company auto parts manufacturing plant opened in North Philadelphia in 1915. Mark Klima worked in the plant for 32 years, till it closed in 2003. According to the U.S. government, Mark lost his job due to NAFTA-related displacement. We revisited the abandoned plant together.
I don't know. Can we keep walking? Maybe somebody will throw us out. Maybe they won't. Let's go.
And how many people would you say worked in this building right in front of us?
So there was certainly 1,300 people working in that building. And this was the late 70s, actually. 2003 was the end. That's when they started to rip out everything that they hadn't sold already. They really stripped it out, though. The only thing they left really was structural stuff. And that's not looking too good either. Yeah, there were a lot of people working in this building.
God bless America. Oh,
If you look at manufacturing jobs in the United States, when I was a kid back in the 1950s, they were about a third of the workforce. This number has steadily decreased over the last 60 years. And it's down now to about 9%, 8 or 9% of the workforce is in manufacturing, from 33 to 9. That's a big decline. Most of the decline is because we are tremendously efficient at increasing productivity in the manufacturing industries. That's the big reason right there. And it's hard to blame technology, but it's easy to blame Mexico.
Between increased automation and increased trade displacement, Philadelphia's manufacturing suffered a stiff decline.
From the time that I started there in '78, you expected the plant to close down at any time. They were really good jobs here, and they were known throughout the city. And it's the impact of losing that, like to the city as a whole, is kind of hard to measure. I mean, it affected entire families. It was a huge community, and it's a tremendous loss to Philadelphia when you lose that.
These were all unskilled and semi-skilled jobs where somebody could just walk off the street and get top dollar because it was a union place. This does not exist anymore.
I really liked working here, actually.
And what would be the primary reason that somebody would leave?
The search for low wages, for cheap labor. They could make a lot more by shipping those jobs to low wage areas, both in the southern part of the United States and ultimately out of the country entirely. It's meant a really significant cut in the standard of living of working class people in the city of Philadelphia.
Where you at, Steph?
I'm up front.
You want me to come around there? Or
yeah.
I'm on, no. Come on out.
No?
Huh?
Okay.
27. 27 years.
First you have to get, you gotta let it set in. And the anger comes, and then also not getting up and going to work, man. They would spring it on you and everybody would be in a frenzy, but it took time. You know what I mean? And they asked you to work with them, you know, like train the Mexicans. It was a win-win situation for them. Okay, you go to Mexico, you pay $15 an hour that they would pay an average worker here, and that includes your benefits and things like that. You go to Mexico and you can pay them $5 an hour, which is top pay for them, but you're paying no health insurance.
Do you think that the government of the U.S. does enough to create an environment where people don't take the jobs to other countries?
I think they create the environment so they do.
The sense that trade is hurting the middle class has political ramifications. Luzerne County is 2 hours northwest of Philadelphia. Traditionally a blue-collar Democratic area, Luzerne County voted Trump in the 2016 election. Luzerne's vote helped flip Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania helped flip the presidential election.
Oh, there were a lot of dress factories. There was a lot of shoe factories in the area. There were cigar factories here too. Those factories at the time provided family-sustaining jobs. I don't think the people of this area support NAFTA because this was a very strong union area. So it is a concern of the people of this area, and I think it had a lot to do with how people voted in the last election. I think the people felt that they've been neglected for a long time. The jobs that I had left.
And from the top of Twig's Restaurant in beautiful downtown Tunkhannock, welcome to Twig's Cafe Radio. This is Sanity Check. This is Libertarian Lou. There's a lot of very mad, middle-aged white guys up here. From a trade standpoint, there's a lot of anger. only because they've seen their jobs lost. And in certain ways, that's true, because those jobs have moved, and a lot of people here in Northeast Pennsylvania have lost their jobs to NAFTA. Those businesses have moved down to Mexico.
Do you think they would come back without NAFTA?
No.
Or do you think people here think it would come back?
Yes, and I think that's the appeal of Trump in this area in many ways. They feel as though that he's going to bring those jobs back.
Nobody doubts that some have lost from NAFTA. So I touched base in Washington, D.C. and Mexico City to see why we do it in the first place.
I've been in this ministry since 1998. I am convinced that competition right now in the world is not country to country. We actually are seeing a phenomenon where regions compete against each other. We are competing for investments. We are competing to be the most important places for companies to set up businesses and to be the most innovative regions in the world. So what you see, for example, is that in Asia, countries such as China and Japan, they rely or they join forces with countries such as Thailand or Taiwan and others so that they collectively can compete better. One of the countries in the region is rich in capital or knowledge or investments or innovation, and the other countries provide certain also competitive elements to the full equation. So when you say to me, how does Mexico compete, or how does Mexico help competing the U.S. with other regions in the world? Well, there are few ways to answer that. On the one hand, the investments that are made in Mexico provide jobs in the U.S. It's estimated that between 5 and 6 million jobs in the U.S. depend on the trade that the U.S. is having with Mexico.
Jason Furman was Barack Obama's top economic advisor. We spoke during his final days in the White House.
Most of our manufactured goods depend on really complex supply chains that operate all around the world. And by the way, we're competing with car manufacturers in Germany, Japan, and other countries around the world, and they also have these types of integrated supply chains. If we didn't, and our parts were suddenly much more expensive, then we wouldn't be able to sell cars, or as many cars relative to, say, a Germany or a Japan.
We are not really selling to each other. We are actually producing goods together. And neither of us would be competitive enough if we are trying to do business outside the region if we did not work together.
I want to focus on the auto industry. I think there's a good case to be made that without the integration with Mexico, which is now providing a low-cost, fairly skilled portion, especially of the supply chain, but also increasingly of assembly, has allowed the United States auto industry to survive. It had a near-death experience after the crisis. I think it's the cost controls that have been permitted by the Mexican relationship have allowed U.S. manufacturing and OEMs to survive.
As you know, Mexico, with the United States, has out-negotiated us and beat us to a pulp through our past leaders. They've made us look foolish. We have a trade deficit of $60 billion with Mexico.
First of all, you should never look at bilateral trade surpluses or trade deficits between two pairs of countries, because it just is very affected by arbitrary things like something is shipped through one country. Does that show up as a trade deficit with the country that made it or the country that it got shipped through? They don't tell you very much about trade itself.
Creates major complications in looking at things simply as imports and exports, because at this point, an import from Mexico to the United States is actually comprised of significant U.S. content, and a final product is 40% U.S. content. So that means that every time the U.S. spends $1 on a product from Mexico, on a final product, 40 cents of that dollar are supporting jobs and industry in the United States. That's just not something that traditional trade statistics tell us.
The other problem is that gains from NAFTA are less immediately obvious than the losses. When somebody loses their job, we make a documentary about it. But when you save $300 on a flat screen, you may not even realize that it's due to trade.
You know, what workers care about is their real wages, which is how much you get paid and how much you can buy with it. And globalization means that the things that you buy are cheaper. And that's the equivalent of actually getting paid more.
So where would we be without NAFTA?
So this would be a big interruption of the supply chain. And what you would see within a few weeks of interrupting trade is that some plants in the U.S. would shut down because they didn't have the parts. And it's not that there's capacity, next door, let's say in Indiana or someplace, to produce that stuff.
Now, a lot of this makes sense. So why is NAFTA so unpopular? It was time to speak with the supposed winners of the deal. So I went to northern Mexico, the heart of Mexican manufacturing.
There will be a giant sucking sound going south.
Durante algunas décadas la base fue la producción del algodón. Era uno de los de mayor calidad en todo el mundo. Nada más era superada por la de Egipto. Casi todos los plantíos de algodón se convirtieron en plantas, en lo que ahora son parques industriales de plantas maquiladoras. Es otro tipo de planta.
Quiero ser rímel de tus pestañas para ver a dónde ven tus ojos. Quiero ser mero dueño y poder cumplirte tus antojos.
In an era of liberalized trade, northern Mexico has emerged as a manufacturing hub.
¿Quién sabe a dónde irá?
Yo creo que maquiladora es un vocablo o una palabra, dicen que viene de España, el maquilar. Pero básicamente en los 60s, que nace la industria manufacturera en Ciudad Juárez, se hablaba de que eran talleres grandes, ¿verdad? Donde ensamblabas cosas sencillas. Todo era muy manual. Pero la maquiladora, ¿qué es? Es un centro de trabajo, ¿sí? Donde manufacturas diferentes partes automotrices, electrónicas, eléctricas, médicas y de plástico. En su mayoría se habla de que el 60% de los productos en la ciudad manufacturados se mandan a Estados Unidos.
Yo soy originaria de aquí de Ciudad Juárez. Aquí he vivido toda mi vida y bueno, pues me ha tocado ver el cambio que ha tenido la ciudad a través de los años, y básicamente la maquiladora es la que vino a revolucionar toda esta forma de vivir. Originalmente, efectivamente se cumplió esa gran expectativa de crear fuentes de trabajo y de traer empleos que mejoraran la condición de las familias. Finalmente resultaba en un trabajo, en un empleo y un ingreso.
Juárez depende principalmente de la maquiladora. Juárez, pues su economía depende en un 60-70% de la maquiladora. Entonces, y bueno, pues tal grado que lo que hemos sabido vender más como ciudad es nuestra ubicación geográfica y nuestra mano de obra barata, ¿no?
Pero a través del tiempo y muy rápido, pues nos dimos cuenta que el trabajo que ofrecen las maquilas, las empresas, en su mayoría norteamericanas, de origen norteamericano, pues son empleos con salario insuficiente, que lo que han creado es grandes cinturones de pobreza en la ciudad.
No es sostenible, ¿sí? Hay crecimiento económico, pero no hay desarrollo económico en la ciudad. De todos los empleos en la maquiladora, solamente el 10% son administrativos, el resto son operativos, el 90% son operativos. Entonces, es una gran cantidad de empleados de la maquiladora que están percibiendo salarios muy bajos. Estamos hablando de $35 a la semana.
El salario mínimo es 80 pesos, que equivale a menos de $4.
al día, un turno de 8 horas.
Y este salario lo va a ganar un obrero, tenga una semana de trabajo o tenga 30 años de trabajo. Lo va a ganar igual, no va a progresar. Su posibilidad de desarrollo dentro de la empresa, siendo obrero o obrera, pues es casi nula.
The maquila's defenders push back that this salary is better than the alternative.
Tú lo mencionas, tú vienes del sur del país. El sur del país y los estados que tú mencionas son estados que salarialmente hablando son bajos. El salario en México actualmente en el 2017 es de 80 pesos, salario mínimo diario, ¿sí? Que en el resto del país, el sur del país, es muy común que paguen un salario mínimo. En Juárez y dentro de la industria maquiladora no se paga el salario mínimo. Se habla de que pagas 3.5 salarios mínimos diarios.
Eso es una mentira. No es bastante. Ni siquiera se acerca a decir que llenas la canasta básica con lo que ganas. Aunque la maquila te dé un poquito más de lo que es el salario mínimo, aún así no te alcanza. Y si comes, no vistes, y si vistes, no comes.
¿Qué fue su trabajo en la maquila?
Mi trabajo era, hacían cartuchos, mi trabajo era cerrar los cartuchos.
¿Y por cuánto tiempo estaba con ellos?
5 años, 6 meses. Yo trabajaba de 3:30 a 12 de la noche. En ese horario yo no tengo permiso de salir para afuera si mi hijo se me enferma. No tenemos tiempo ni para ir al baño. Pues bueno, porque pues de bien o mal de ahí comen, ¿verdad? Pero pues malo porque pues los tienen todo el día ahí y no hay oportunidades de ascender a más.
Pienso que llega el momento en que los jefes se olvidan de que eres humano, de que tienes una familia, de que te enfermas, de que te duele, de que te cansas. Te miran como si fueras una maquinita que eres para producir y producir y producir.
Primero se le acosa, si no se le exige demasiado. Y si uno no cede, pues simplemente no tienes ni, ¿cómo se dice? Cómo prosperar dentro de la empresa. No puedes, porque no accedes a nada de eso. Si tú no accedes al acoso o a que me estás de más horas, aunque tú no puedas, aunque estés muy cansada, no me importa, tú me sacas el trabajo y se acabó.
Los hijos difícilmente llegan ni siquiera al bachiller. En su mayoría nunca llegan a la universidad. Y lo que hacen es entrar a la maquila. De tal manera que se forma un círculo vicioso.
Multiple women in Juarez told me that their daughters already worked in la maquila.
Sí hay una necesidad de empleos mejor pagados en la ciudad. El error que hemos cometido como sociedad aquí en Ciudad Juárez es apostarle principalmente a la maquiladora. Es más, únicamente a la maquiladora le hemos apostado. No hemos sabido diversificar la economía en la ciudad.
Now, some folks are trying to diversify Juarez's economy.
My name is Ricardo Mora. I'm born in El Paso, Texas, raised in Ciudad Juarez, and today we're at Technology Hub, an innovation, entrepreneurship, and business center in Ciudad Juarez. We put people together, we put companies together, we put venture capital together for startups, for entrepreneurs, and we're building the ecosystem.
Digamos que mi puesto es de diseño, entonces yo les ayudo a intercambiar, comunicar el mensaje que ellos quieren dar a la comunidad específica que quieren.
So part of our work is helping the maquiladora not just be a mass producer of hands doing things. There is a need to be able to go down to the level of the manufacturer, you know, the bottom line, and be able to help those people rise up the ladder.
But there's an apparent contradiction here. Mexico would benefit from higher quality, more skilled, and better paid labor, moving up the value chain, so to speak. But the Mexican workforce is globally competitive in part because it's cheap.
El argumento, efectivamente, como tú lo dices, de los empresarios o de los inversionistas es: yo estoy en una competencia mundial Y si yo no logro el costo que necesito para que mi empresa sea competitiva, pues yo me voy a ir.
La organización obrera en la ciudad ha sido pues limitada, contenida, pues, reducida pues casi a nada. Es mínima la organización sindical obrera que existe en la ciudad.
A key question around trade agreements is the level of labor standards guaranteed in the pact. My time on the ground suggested that these standards could be raised. I spoke with maquila workers that tried to organize. Their efforts didn't go so well.
En el año 2015 empezamos con una manifestación de pedirles, exigirle a la maquila Lesma de un salario que ellos desde enero, febrero no nos lo habían prometido.
En el caso de nosotros que decidimos levantar la voz,
pues empezamos a platicar con los compañeros y empezamos a manifestarnos y a pedirle al gerente que nos subiera el salario y él se negó y quisimos hacer un sindicato independiente para nosotros mismos.
Cuando la empresa supo que nosotros nos organizamos para alzar la voz y venir a conciliación arbitraje y pedir apoyo para que abogaran con la empresa para que no nos trataran más mal, nos humillaron.
Gerentes, todos te miran, hasta te dicen cosas, o sea, te hostigan muy, muy feo.
Llegó el momento en que ni siquiera al baño nos dejaban ir por el hecho de que nos organizamos y alzamos la voz y dijimos que ya no queríamos que nos maltrataran, que ya no hubiera hostigamiento, que mejoraran las cosas por tratar de que las cosas fueran mejores. Todo lo contrario, fue peor las cosas.
The U.S.-Mexican economic relationship can certainly be improved, but an incorrect diagnosis can lead to an inefficient treatment.
We're going to build the wall. We have no choice. We have no choice. Millions and millions of people losing their jobs. That won't happen with me. And in the end, I think it'll be good for both countries.
So it's difficult for people, even in Washington, to understand is that for years this community has actually grown up together, and what happens on one side of the boundary affects the other side of the boundary, whether it's economic or political. Huge decisions and policies are being put into place based on misinformation rather than facts. And that affects our community in a number of different ways. It is disruptive to have a fence because it impacts our families and our community. It also impacts us financially because the more money we put into a physical fence or an electronic fence or the people required to man that fence, that money has to come from somewhere.
And we already have a wall. If you'll drive from one end of El Paso to the other, a lot of money was spent probably 10 years ago building significant, at huge expense, a wall on probably 700 miles of the border. So a wall in and of itself just means that a whole new group of ladder companies will come up. So it's not going to solve the problem.
I don't think a wall is going to do anything.
It's ridiculous. It's a waste of money, and there's so many other things we can be spending on that would better our country versus spending money on that.
But it's not just physical barriers. The Trump administration has threatened a trade tax, upwards of 20%, on goods coming in from across the border.
Well, the border adjustment tax, I call it a trade tax, would also make our nation less competitive. This proposed 20% tax on goods brought into the United States will in fact be borne by the American consumer.
I don't think that those in society that sit way up there understand how serious that is for someone like us three to have to suffer, let's say, a 20% increase in anything.
Yeah.
So imagine if they decided, you know what, we're going to stop giving Americans our produce. Then what are we going to do?
So if this is the wrong way to try to fix economic ties between the U.S. and Mexico, is there a right way?
Yeah, there are probably several things that could be done. I mean, for one, NAFTA was an agreement that was negotiated and signed more than 20 years ago at this point. So there are things that exist today that just simply didn't exist back then. Biologic drugs, cell phones connected to the internet, e-commerce. Labor was a side agreement to the NAFTA, and it largely didn't have teeth. So we could look at rolling that into the main agreement itself, adding some teeth to it. That would ensure U.S. workers that the reason that Mexico's competitive isn't because of low labor standards.
I would have rules with respect to the environment and worker health and safety that would apply so that we become a bloc that pulls up standards, much more the way the original European Union project did, where there was a floor as between countries.
Technology. 1994 e-commerce essentially didn't exist. We can create some amazing opportunities for small business startups in all 3 countries.
Does NAFTA need to be changed? Yes. But the rhetoric and the saber rattling about pulling out of NAFTA is really ridiculous and extremely parochial.
But even with an improved deal, there's still a fundamental fact of trade. Even if gains outweigh losses, a good number of people will still lose. If governments on either side of the wall don't address this, both are going to end up paying for it.
Absolutely, we're not doing enough. Absolutely need to do a much better job of training people, of compensating people who don't get paid as well, of making sure there's a basic safety net, whether it's health insurance for people that are having difficult times in the economy.
27 years of experience, you must really be an expert on these issues. Is it possible to find work using the skills that you build over those 27 years? Are there much opportunities?
Not directly, because I don't have an education. I don't have a degree to go along with that. You see, I did not go to school to be a manufacturing engineer. I learned it on the fly. Being away from it for some time now, I really don't feel confident enough that I can do that. I need to catch up on my computer skills, and it's over there now. Again, I'm 62 years old, guys. All I ever wanted to do was work and retire, so that's what I'm trying to do.
Last question from me. How do you feel about Cardone Industries?
You really want me to answer that?